working in a restaurant has its highs and lows. On one hand, you get to meet all sorts of interesting people, and no 2 days are ever the same. On the other hand, you encounter your fair share of entitled customers, the type of people who think the world revolves around them and everyone else is just here to serve their whims. These people, often referred to as Karens in internet culture, seem to think that knowing the owner of a place somehow grants them unlimited power. I've had my share of experiences with entitled Karens over the years, but there's one incident that stands out as the most absurd. It happened at the small family-owned restaurant where I worked. It's a cozy, well-established place with a regular flow of customers. Locals who come in often and know the staff, tourists passing through town, and the occasional entitled patron who thinks the world owes them something. The restaurant was a staple in the community, a place where people came to relax, enjoy a good meal, and chat with familiar faces. One afternoon, we were in the middle of a busy lunch shift. It was the usual chaos, orders flying in and out of the kitchen, customers chatting at the tables, and the constant sound of clinking dishes and bustling staff. I was working the front, handling seating and helping out the servers where I could. That's when she walked in. From the moment she stepped through the door, I could tell she was trouble, dressed to the nines in clothes that screamed expensive but lacked any real taste. She strutted in with an air of superiority that immediately set off alarm bells in my head. Her oversized sunglasses stayed perched on her nose, even though we were indoors, and she carried herself like she expected everyone to drop what they were doing to attend to her. "Excuse me," she said, waving her hand at me with the kind of dismissiveness that suggested she was used to getting her way. "Hi there." I greeted her, forcing a smile. "How can I help you today?" She looked me up and down, clearly unimpressed, before finally speaking. "I need a table for one, and make it quick." Now, we were pretty busy, and there were already several parties ahead of her on the wait list. I glanced at the seating chart and saw that it would be at least a 20-minute wait before we could get her a table. "Sure thing," I replied, trying to keep things polite and professional. "Right now, we have a bit of a wait, about 20 minutes or so, but if you'd like to leave your name, I'll make sure to get you seated as soon as a table opens up." Her reaction was immediate, and not in a good way. She huffed loudly, her face contorting into an expression of disbelief and indignation. "20 minutes? I don't think so. I know the owner, and I'm sure he wouldn't appreciate you making me wait." Here it was, the classic Karen move, the "I know the owner" card, as if that somehow exempted her from the realities of restaurant operations. I've worked in the industry long enough to know that most people who make that claim don't actually know the owner. And even if they do, it doesn't mean they get to skip the line. But still, I decided to play it cool. "That's great," I said, still maintaining my professional tone. "But unfortunately, we're at full capacity right now, so we're asking all of our guests to wait their turn. I'll get you seated as soon as I can." She didn't like that response. Her face turned a shade of red, and she pointed a manicured finger at me. "Listen," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "I don't think you understand. I know the owner, personally, and I will not be treated like some random customer. You will seat me right now, or I will make sure you regret it." The not-so-veiled threat. Another classic Karen move. At this point, I was more amused than anything. There was no way she actually knew the owner because, well, I knew the owner. He was my uncle, and he would have laughed in her face if he heard someone pulling this stunt. But rather than escalating the situation, I decided to remain calm and professional. "I understand your frustration," I said, "but the wait time applies to everyone. I promise we'll get you seated as soon as a table is available." For a moment, she just stared at me, as if she couldn't believe I wasn't bending to her will. Then, with an exasperated sigh, she pulled out her phone. "Fine," she snapped. "I'll just call him myself. We'll see how you feel about your little wait list when he hears about this." I watched as she dialed, holding the phone to her ear with a smug expression. It was clear she expected this call to end with her being whisked away to the best table in the house, with me groveling for forgiveness. But what happened next was something I couldn't have anticipated. The phone rang and rang, but no one picked up. After a few seconds, she lowered the phone, frowning. She tried again, dialing the number with more force this time, as if pressing the buttons harder would somehow change the outcome. Again, the phone rang, and again, no one picked up. I knew exactly what was happening. She didn't have the owner's number because she didn't actually know the owner. She was bluffing, and now that bluff was being called. It took everything in me to keep a straight face. "Is everything okay?" I asked, feigning concern. She glared at me, her frustration growing by the second. "He's probably busy," she muttered, clearly flustered. "But when I get a hold of him, you're going to be in big trouble." "Of course," I said, nodding. "In the meantime, would you like me to take your name for the waitlist?" Her face twisted in anger, and for a moment, I thought she was going to lash out. But instead, she turned on her heel and stormed out of the restaurant, her high heels clicking angrily against the floor. The door swung shut behind her with a loud thud. And just like that, she was gone. I stood there for a moment, processing what had just happened. It wasn't the first time I'd dealt with an entitled customer, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. But something about this encounter stuck with me. Maybe it was the sheer audacity of her lie. Or maybe it was the fact that she genuinely believed that pretending to know the owner would get her special treatment. Either way, it was one of the most ridiculous things I had ever witnessed. A few days later, I told my uncle about the incident, expecting him to get a good laugh out of it. And he did. He chuckled as I described the entitled Karen and her dramatic exit, shaking his head in disbelief. Some people just can't handle being told no, he said, still smiling. But hey, at least you kept your cool. And that was the end of it. Or so I thought. A few weeks after the incident, she returned. This time, it was during a slower period in the afternoon, and I was once again working the front. The second I saw her walk through the door, my stomach dropped. I knew this wasn't going to end well. She approached the counter, her expression cold and calculating. Without a word, she handed me a business card. I glanced down at it, and my heart skipped a beat. The card had the logo of a prominent local law firm, and her name was printed in bold letters at the top. "I'm here on behalf of my client," she said, her voice sharp and businesslike. "You've been accused of harassment and discrimination, and I'm here to ensure that this establishment is held accountable." For a moment, I was speechless. Harassment? Discrimination? What was she talking about? And then it hit me. This was her revenge. She hadn't been able to get her way the first time, so now she was trying to bully the restaurant into submission through legal threats. I didn't know what to do, so I calmly took the card and told her that any legal matters would be handled by our management. She smirked at me, as if she had already won. But, as luck would have it, my uncle was in the restaurant that day. He overheard the exchange and came out to the front, his face calm but serious. "Is there a problem here?" he asked. Addressing her directly, she turned to him, her eyes narrowing. "Yes, there is. Your employee here has been extremely rude and discriminatory toward me, and I intend to take legal action if this behavior isn't corrected." My uncle raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "Discriminatory? In what way?" She hesitated, clearly caught off guard by his directness. "Well, I was treated unfairly the last time I was here. I was made to wait when other customers were seated ahead of me, and I know for a fact that this was personal." My uncle just stared at her for a long moment before he finally spoke. "You know, it's interesting that you say that," he said, his tone measured, "because the last time you were here, I wasn't notified of any issues. And I'm the owner." Her face turned pale. "You said you knew the owner," my uncle continued. "And yet, this is the first time I'm meeting you. So, who exactly do you know?" She stammered, clearly flustered, her confidence crumbling before our eyes. "Well, I must have been mistaken," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. My uncle didn't let up. "You can take that business card back," he said firmly. "There's no legal case here, and I suggest you think twice before making false accusations against my staff." She didn't say another word. She snatched the card from my hand, turned, and walked out the door for the second and last time. As the door closed behind her, my uncle turned to me and smiled. "You handled that well," he said. I nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. The Karen had tried to pull her tricks again, but this time, she didn't get what she wanted. And that, in the world of entitled people, is the ultimate defeat. So, that's my story of dealing with an entitled Karen who tried to pull the "I know the owner" card and failed spectacularly. Working in the restaurant industry teaches you a lot about people. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that entitlement knows no bounds. But as long as you stay calm and stand your ground, you'll come out on top. And to all the Karens out there, just a friendly reminder, knowing the owner doesn't mean you get to break the rules.